This lecture has been made available to you courtesy of the American Numismatic Society.
It's my turn to introduce my friend Liv Yarrow, as you know, one of the co-organizers of this conference, which is very well timed to coincide with the publication of her next book, which I think according to Amazon, they have a month and day, June something, 2021, The Roman Republic to 49 BCE, Using Coins as Sources, which is the latest installment in Cambridge University Press's series about numismatics and history. Earlier, she accused me of publishing a book with Oxford. I think I understand the slip because her two previous books were with Oxford University Press, Historiography at the End of the Republic, Provincial Perspectives on Roman Rule, a single-authored monograph, and then later a co-edited volume with Christopher Smith, Polybius, Imperialism and Cultural Politics, with Lucia Carbone. She is co-directing the Roman Republican Die Project. And finally, by way of introduction, if you've never spent time with her blog, leavyarrow.org, Adventures in My Head, then you're missing out. It is a wonderful public-facing piece of scholarship that is, for me, a wonderful way to while away a rainy Saturday afternoon or so. It's great stuff there. So we're looking forward to her talk, Small Change in Roman Republican Coinage. Welcome, Liv.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. And reset up everything so I can see you and I can see my slides. So like a good academic, I've changed my title. We're going to call this paper The End of the Untitled at the Roman Mint to just narrow and focus ourselves. None of this and so little of my career would be possible without Rick. He introduced me to Andrew McCabe many years ago, and it's Andrew McCabe who suggested, when I was looking for something to honor Rick with for this conference, that I put my mind to the end of the small change at Rome and why the Romans would do something like that. Rick also introduced me to Lucia many, many years ago, and she's become fast friends, and I've enjoyed reading her work, and it is such an honor to work with her in preserving Richard Schaefer's material. Again, a connection that when I had questions and I went to Rick, he's like, no, you need to know, you need to talk to Schaefer. And none of this would be possible without Rick. So I hope I can do a little something to honor his memory. This paper, this talk is an abbreviated version of the first draft of the paper, which has even evolved. All of the pre-writing, all of the images, all of the thinking and machinations of how I got there is up on the blog in a series of blog posts, because that's where I make my public mistakes. So people can inform me about better ways of doing things. And this deck of slides is up in PDF form. It's the last post on the blog. So if you would like a copy of my slides, you can go to my blog and download it too. Also, don't tell Cambridge, but if you want a sneak peek of my book, I'm willing to share sections or perhaps more with anyone who asks. I'm open to those emails. I have proofs. It's just waiting for the printers and the shipping at this point. So moving on, let's see. These are the lovely 3 specimens that Rick has gifted to the ANS that are Unciae. And so they are the inspiration, as it were, for this paper. Unciae are very small. You need to think of them about the size in this period of a denarius. They have nearly the same diameter, although they tend to be a bit heavier, but they need not be. The weight can be really variable. So just when you're thinking about it in your hands. And then I like scale. So it's the width of these things is about the width of 2 pencils. So if you can't imagine a denarius in your hand, but of course this audience can, this is your other mnemonic to think about it. This paper, the one for the volume for Rick, has a series of aims. Those aims are pretty straightforward. I want to identify all the known specimens of unciae made after 146, more 141 more readily. I want to think about what the consequences of revised chronologies are. There's been a lot of work that we'll talk about as we go on about the chronology of the Republican series in this period, in the post-146 period, that needs to be considered when we think about what's going on with bronze. I want to think about patterns in metrology. There's a little bit of that in this paper. And then the more speculative, how do we connect the moneyers to known historical events, and how do we track the pattern? Because of course, with the Roman mint and the minting and the regular annual minting, we have more chronological possibilities for mapping onto historical phenomena. But I also think it's really important to get the issues of the Roman mint in dialogue with what's going on with small bronzes throughout the Mediterranean. And that's why this conference really excites me. And I'm very glad that I get to go on the last day, because I've been able to watch and rewrite and think about where I can connect this material to the preceding material. So like McCabe, I'm going to walk you through the series in methodical order, or the order that I believe to be the correct order as best we can know. But I don't want you to miss some of the interconnections or overall arching themes. So over the next few slides, please note how small our known specimens are. I only have 94 specimens where I know the weight and can incorporate that. Think about what that means in comparison with something like Copia, which Ewan talked about yesterday. He has 140 plus coins from Rick alone, let alone all of the other ones that were pre-known. This is teeny, and yet it's being made in the capital. What survives, at least, is teeny. But I take the point that we heard from another speaker. I think, and forgive me, I'm forgetting who I heard it from now, that reuse of material and recycling of material may adversely affect survival rates. So we need to keep that in mind with this as well. In design shifts, we're going to move from Attic helmet Roma to a period of experimentation, sometimes with Roma imitating her representations on the denarius, to a few other personal or popular deities. And then we're going to go back to the Attic helmet Roma. So we move through sort of 3 shifts or 3 periods with the obverse. And then with the reverse, we start with the prow. We have a blip where we see a wreath, particularly an oak wreath. Then we get some more experimentation, symbols and animals. And then we go back to the wreath. We have a nice chunk of series where we have the wreath dominating, and the very end, and on my on the possible chronology, we may end with the cornucopia. And here we should be thinking both of Clive Stannard's pseudo-mints cornucopia, but also with the cornucopia that we're seeing down in southern Italy, which are all earlier. So one of the running themes of this is that the Roman mint is looking to models for bronze from the provinces, from the colonies, from Greater Italy. And it's not center informing periphery, but periphery informing center, at least with design choices. So my working hypothesis that needs to be interrogated is that Roman moneyers want to be seen as addressing popular concerns, that you could make hay, you could have political capital made if you used your time in office, which you had to share, which was very early in your career, for political advantage. We have literary testimony about the popularity of being seen to do a good job securing the money. We don't know what Gratidianus's legislation was, or some people think they know, and there's lots of argument and debate over it, but nobody argues that he was popular because he was seen to have acted. Schaeffer called this coinage vanity coin, called these sort of small bronzes a vanity coinage. But I think we can also, and I think that's true, they're doing it for themselves, but the motivation is for the striking is telling us something about how they want to operate within a political landscape. And so the coinage can be placed, is a place of political discourse in this period that I think is accepted. And that, or we could see the coinage as reaffirming or reframing or shaping or shifting or angling Roman ideologies. So it's not that anyone is doing anything that's truly unique, but they're putting their spin on the office and the messaging. So this hypothesis hasn't come out of anywhere, and it's not part of the bronze specifically. It's about my work with Lucia on the building and drawing on Richard Schaeffer's work on control marked issues, which is the focus of our transcription of RDP. But the historical patterns that we see emerging, that when control marks come in, they sort of peak in the crises that we put the name Saturninus to, but are clearly crises around the food supply and access to land, and much bigger than one man. They're much bigger than Saturninus. We have another peak right at the social war, and then we have this really big peak, the height of the control marking with the most complex systems during the Sinan regime, its collapse, and Sulla's dictatorship. Also in the bottom chart here, can you see my mouse moving? Okay. We also notice that these same peaks correspond to where we get the most serrated issues. Rick's proven that control marks could be used to track batches through the minting process, but there's huge variety in these control marks. They're not systematized. The thing that stands out most about them is how individual to the moneyer they are. They're the moneyer performing control of the coinage. Likewise, serration is very much is very labor intensive and doesn't seem to meet an actual problem, but rather a perceived problem around the security of the coinage. So this next slide is another timeline, and it shows the groupings. We've got a group of unciae that are made in the 130s. These are all on the uncial standard. We have another one made in the 110s, and then we have what I call the last flourishing, or the unciae that also tend to come with sem-unciae, an even smaller denomination. This overall pattern of striking bronze denominations is reflective of the work of both Molinari and Lockyer, which has really updated and improved our understanding of chronological issues in this historical period, but the implications thereon are there's still plenty of work to do about how we put with these new series, how we think about that in terms of historical evolution. You will also notice that the last flourishing is right around that Saturninus political crisis. So the 130s group is all, almost all have the prow and the head of Roma. And this ordering that's given in this chart is based on Molinari's dating system informed by the hoard evidence. If we look at the moneyers, do we have anyone who looks like they have a pattern of political concerns? I would say that in 3 out of the 7 cases, we can say something about their political orientation. Minucius is celebrating on his coinage very famously an ancestor from the pseudo-historical or earliest days of the Republic, who's famous for having for having stopped a famine and by selling grain cheaply to the Roman people. This Curiatus, who is a moneyer in 135, is either related to or the same man as a tribune who we know to have locked up the consuls when they removed tribune powers around the levy, and also to have made a big stink about the price of grain, again facing down patrician consuls in the Senate and being famous for it. Similarly, our last of this group, Metellus, we believe that he's attested in an inscription made famous by Garnsey and Rathbone for sourcing grain in Thessaly to feed the urban poor. So we're seeing some sort of correlation, maybe not causation, between individuals making a name for themselves around issues of the grain supply, and also taking the extra effort to also strike the unciae, to strike this smallest denomination. If we compare the weights of these early unciae with the weights of just one example of coins in circulation, I am using the Bath hoard from Pompeii, recently republished by Stannard just in 2019, which had 90 specimens of bronzes and was believed to have been swept down the drain in the bathhouse about 70 BC. So it's as close as we can get to a snapshot of circulation in a moment of time. You can see that the most common weights of these small coins in this hoard hover in the around 2 grams. These, the 130 specimens we know, they hover closer to 3, but they shade down in there. There's at least some overlap. So I'm hinting at the fact that it might be that that the unciae was popular, or was thought to have possibly been popular to the moneyers, like this is a good thing to mint, because there's a hunger for this size of coinage with in the marketplace, and that would be a known phenomenon. Metellus is the first to put the oak crown. Quite often, when people discuss the Republican series, they ignore the provincial and Macedonian heritage of the oak crown, and they focus on its meaning, made so popular by Augustus, of being the corona civica for saving the life of a citizen. Some might read it that way, but it's also very clear iconographically that the precedent of an oak wreath on a small bronze is pre-existing and dominant even. And here, of course, I'm referring back to the work of Suzanne Frey Cooper in Sicily, and particularly on the Romano-Sicilian bronzes. And I completely endorse her train of interaction that brings this iconography from Macedonia into the Roman sphere. And from Sicily, I'm suggesting that it then next goes up to Rome itself for the smallest denominations. As we move into the 110s, we get a bit more historical information, and we also get a different insight into the chronology. Here, it's Lockyer's Mind the Gap article in Numismatic Chronicle 2018 that's so critical. He communicates what he sees in the hordes by saying that by talking about relative chronology more than absolute chronology. So he uses terms like later in the sequence or earlier in the sequence. And so I am not terribly confident that we know exactly what these dates are, but I think that as an approximate order, we're getting closer to what is the historical reality. These moneyers are quite fun. Crawford was dismissive of Syme's reconstruction of Cippius, but Syme pulled together a lot of epigraphic evidence to suggest that the Cippii may very well have been a mercantile family, connecting them to the bronze wares out of Campania and to the epigraphic evidence of families from Carii. And perhaps most famously, we have in Lucullus's satire a fragment of a witticism of a Cippius, in which he says, "I am not asleep for everyone, wig, 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 just my wife's lover." That this joke of this crass businessman, and Lucilius's satires are populated with the people of the 110s who were well known, such as Granius. And so I think we can assume that Cippius was thought of as a historical figure. So if the quote doesn't apply to the moneyer, perhaps someone in his family. And Lucilius loved to make fun of these wantonnebes, the people of a class who were perhaps of the equites or mercantile class who were seeking further political advancement. He uses a rudder as his mint mark, and on his unciae, he replaces Roma with Heracles. What's really odd is that Hercules and Fortuna don't really go together in like high culture or theology. But if you search through the poetics and like the conversational bits of Cicero's letters or Plautus's plays, when people are talking, they go by Hercules, fortune has it. And this is part of the rhetoric of everyday speech, the two go together. And they both have cult centers in the Forum Boarium, which is the market forum of Rome. They anchor either end of the forum. And so I would say that they are types that are appropriate to a man such as Syme suggests that we should think of Cippius and his gens as in Rome and their status. We can say less about Fontinus. We know what we know about the gens comes mostly from one Ciceronian speech. They're senatorial, but they haven't had a great fortune. We know that one Fontinus does very well under the does very well under the Synan regime, and thus perhaps they're aligning themselves with the populist cause, but there is less suggestion that that is true. What I want you to notice is how much Quadrans's unciae looks like a denarius, and particularly like this denarius, with Mars and Roma and the wreath obverse. Finally, we have the Nerva, and Nerva's coin is perhaps denarius is perhaps one of the most illustrated Roman coin types, particularly to illustrate popular politics and the concern to be protecting citizen rights, particularly through the voting bridges. And this unciae is unique. The obverse still looks a bit like a denarius. What the quadruped on the back is mysterious, but we probably have a clue from his quadrans. The problem, though, is that in looking at the quadrans, I noticed that a lot of them were even lighter than the unciae, and it became quite clear in metallurgical analysis that this quadrans may well have been copied by a pseudomint, and that there are a much smaller number of ones that would be better placed with the Roman mint itself. And so this study has inadvertently helped us start to disentangle the questions of how do we tell an official quadrans from a imitation quadrans, of which there were so many. We have a similar case with the Quadrans of Philippus, and here die links clearly suggest that there are die links in the lower weight quadrant and die links in the heavier specimens, suggesting that these ones may very well be imitations, and that these ones may very well be the product of the Roman mint. So we only have 2 surviving unciae from Philippus, but we do have some nice bits of language from Cicero talking about Philippus's early career, where he was happy to play the demagogue to win popular support, even though in the end, he ends up being the staunch conservative of the Sullan Senate. He evolves as is politically expedient throughout, a real survivor in the story. So it's likely that this is the last issue of this grouping of unciae from the 110s. And what's really exciting about it is that it's made by 3 moneyers all together. I got curious about the pattern of when collegiality was celebrated on the coinage, where moneyers made an extra effort to be seen to be working together in harmony. And there's just not that many cases. And again, they kind of group. We have a group in the 110s or the 1-teens. We have a group in the Synan era, and then only sporadically and partially, not even complete, thereafter. So I wonder if the performance of collegiality was another political strategy of certain groups of Romans. The other thing that's interesting or suggestive is that the rest of the series in denominations has a very traditional deities for the obverse, paired with symbols of that deity on the reverse. And yet Unkia has Apollo and a lyre, not Roma, even though Roma has been so dominant and so well used in previous issues. There's a lot of scholarship about what Apollo or Beovis means in the late Republic. I have some thoughts. They're not fully formed yet, but I would say that it's definitely an area that has been well studied, but also could use further contemplation about what Apollo might have meant to a Roman context. So I'm out of time, and that means I just want to show you that the 110s Unciae are much heavier than the 130s Unciae. And not only that, but if we go forward, the last flourishing, and we have enough weight specimens of the Tibullus and Herennius issues to show that the Unciae gets heavier and heavier even as it gets more common before it disappears altogether. I'm going to skip that, but here's our friend Saturninus making an Unciae, and notice that lovely wreath. And then finally, we'll end with Rick's coins and how they pair with this restored and these three unusual semuncia, a 1/24th piece of a coin, a very small coin indeed. And for the sake of time, I will now stop and allow us to have some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Liv. That's a wonderful talk. I really appreciate the attention paid to historical context for someone like me. That's everything. And I find a lot that's compelling here. Andrew McCabe, would you like to get us started?
Yes, that was really an excellent presentation, and the subject has never been talked about before and is very curious, Liv. I have three comments, so you might need to note them down. First of all, I agree with Richard Schaefer that these were vanity issues, and I think that the varying design types prove it, because if coins were made for really mass circulation, then you wouldn't use weird designs every year. You would use a standard design. I think that kind of does prove the vanity aspect. So the moneyers just wanted to complete the series. I wanted to issue these coins. The second point is these coins were made on typically heavy, and okay, I know they vary between 4 grams and 6 grams, but the point is that or 3 grams and 6 grams. Even at the lighter end, these were heavier by far than the general mass of circulating coins, which again suggests a medallic or donative or vanity purpose, but also indicative the Romans never officially got off the high weight standard for bronze. In other words, they were still officially operating on a sextantal standard at 100 BC. Absolutely sextantal. It's just that the general mass of day-to-day coinage was made lighter because of, practical reasons. The third point I wanted to make is that the coins are found worn. I mean, some of them, the Tubulus ones and the Herennia ones, are found worn. So they did circulate. So I invite us all to think, was there a specific monetary requirement? I mean, I've often speculated that some of these odd denominations might have been part of corn dole payment costs. In other words, that something cost 5 uncia, so you use a trians and an uncia, or something, or gave an uncia in return for a semis. But I don't know. It's just something to think about. So there are 3 points.
Yeah, I love it. The word that you said that really I want to underscore and say that I think I agree with you on is the donative. That I think the way these coins enter circulation is that the moneyers perhaps even give them away, that these are not being used to make state purposes. They're very small, and that they are vanity in the sense that they want their names on them. They want to complete the series. Maybe they'll put one into a family archive. And it's really only those last two, the Herennius and the Tibullus, seem to have been made in any real quantity. I'm sorry, and now the last thing you said, which I wanted to circle back to, has slipped out of my brain, even as I made notes on the earlier things.
Yes, the last point was that because the Herennia and Tubulus are found worn and in large quantities, there must have been monetary uses, and can we think of something that perhaps related to some government-related thing that cost X and required Y change or something?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. We have some actual data, and that was my first thought as well, Andrew. The price for 5 modi of grains on the grain dole was 2 denarii. And what's interesting, and the reason we know that it stays at 2 denarii even post re-tariffing, is that that when the Gracchi are proposing their prices, they're using a weird fraction per modii, but the weird fraction is because they've moved from 10 asses to 16 asses, but the overall cost of under the sporadic donatives before the Gracchi and then in the Gracchian period is, if you're showing up to get your monthly 5 modi allotment, you need 2 denarii. And so I can't fit this into that, which is really frustrating. There must have been something that this was convenient to pay for. The baths, maybe? I mean, but that's speculation. So I don't have a good answer.
On the baths, I think that was traditionally a quadrans, and the Veturia quadrans of 137 or so BC, which shows strigil and oil and so on, does indicate. But I mean, there was something, and what I would ask for all historians is to look out for what it was that these things might have been used for. You know, there'll be clues somewhere.
I think Clive probably knows.
I think Clive has his hand up. You're muted, Clive, please. Clive, take off the mute. Yeah.
I wonder if one could look at things like Maundy money. I mean, money was given away on certain ceremonial occasions. These things, to my mind, are too small to have made much difference in the circulating medium. And it's right in the middle of the crisis of small change. So you have all the things I will describe later. But it could have been that there was some ceremonial occasion that required these. And that might also be a clue as to why the types are out of the ordinary. Yeah. One comment that I'd like to make while I've got it is I'm becoming less convinced by the argument that you have imitations within these bronze series. For 2 reasons. One is the imitations are too good, and they would require some systematic person doing it, so they can't be sporadic. And then again, as I use the term pseudo-mint, I don't mean someone just copying. I mean this strange thing of putting together different types. But I've been looking at the thing that Schaefer and my good friend Andrew published, the Star Bronze, and I've been coming to the conclusion that I think now that they may be wrong, and it is probably simply a different officina or something producing them. Mm. So I might be wrong, but I'm just saying, let's be careful and not jump to the conclusion that everything is an imitation.
I think that's very wise, and I really like the suggestion on the donative and the Maundy money parallel. We know, thanks to the work of Harriet Flower on domestic cult in the Roman Republic, how much coins played a role in the offerings to the lares and the penates. And of course, from later periods, we know about money as a gift at the Saturnalia and the New Year's. And because there's a place for money, both in gift giving, but also in donatives. And then, of course, I'm very taken with the idea that your river finds may have been offerings of the wishing well variety, since we have Nemi and Vicarello and other water places where we get these coin deposits. So I think we're on to the right track of possible speculation. How we prove it, I'm not sure.
If I could just add into Clive's comment, is that I agree what Clive says, is that, for example, Caius Fonteius issued quadrantes, both fairly heavy and pretty light. And I just think it was, maybe they just ran a bit short of runs on the day, or, you know, they did. I think it's, I mean, everybody who knows me knows that I think weight is of no consequence whatsoever, that the Romans basically just used coins with whatever bronze they could find. So I don't think the fact that there's heavy and light issues of the quadrantes in this period matters. I do think that the P Nerva one, for example, that you showed, my example of, comes heavy and light, but I think that the light ones are also extremely fine style, and I think that they were probably just official, and there was some admin issue. So, you know, this is my consistent story, basically. Of course, the weights don't matter. Style does matter. Quality of manufacture and how the coins look matter.
Mm-hmm.
I see Richard Weigel in the Q&A, but before that, I wanted to call on Suzanne Fry-Cooper.
Okay, yes, thank you so much. I would also throw another possibility in the round. Since these coins are so, you know, the issues are so small, I would be careful with the Monday money interpretation. I think these were monnayers. They were keen to give out messages. And probably there is also the aspect of wanting to issue a complete range of denominations. It's then like a bit what you see under Domitian, when for the Ludi Secularis, you have the whole series. And I think this is what they want to do. And this is also why they are a bit rare, so they are not very interesting. And then also, as for the Apollo, there are the series, you know, in the provinces, and I can quickly share the screen with what I have shown yesterday, which might be helpful so far. You see, this is the Romano-Sicilian series, and then the smallest issue are Apollo denominations. And I show you here again the whole overview of the, you see, of the series. And this Romano-Sicilian works totally different. They issued the denominations when they needed them. You know, some they issue only the unit, the as, the so-called, and others have a fuller range. Some they have only the smaller denominations here, like only the quadrans for Fabius. This is why Barfeld also didn't associate it to this series, because he couldn't figure out how this works. So we have only 3 Apollones, but then you see the middle one is one with the lyre, and also the smallest one here of Chrysippus is a lyre. And they are really rare. And again, Rick had this one. It's the only one I know of, and I had to decipher it because I think he didn't decipher it rightly. This is just something quick to add.
Yeah, it's striking, and no pun intended, but clearly punning.
Yeah.
Great, here we are demonstrating the silver lining of a Zoom-based conference, able to flip back and forth between shared screens. And
yes, I think really that this is, I don't like much Zoom compared to the true meeting, but there are also some advantages.
Thank you, Susanna. It's very very quickly, we're running out of time. I have lots of questions, but I have the benefit of being able to have a beer with Liv someday in the future, and we could do this in person. But Richard Weigel very quickly asked if you can comment on your thoughts on the animal, on the reverse of that unique coin, the gazelle-looking thing.
Yeah, I lean towards goat maybe, but that's partly, and this is really bad logic. Nerva has on his ass as a secondary symbol a dancing woman pulling at her skirt, and I have wondered if she might not be a Maenad, and so we're trying to look for a theme that connects the issues, but I'm just going to call it a quadruped.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. There's a question from Seth Bernard, but I think if you could find that, Liv, and maybe
I've already made a note of it. I think it's very smart, and we are good Twitter buddies. So I will continue the conversation there with him.
Thank you very much, Liv. That was an amazing paper. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Thank you for watching the American Numismatic Society's YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like our online resources, publication, and events, you can support the Society by becoming a member. And don't forget to check out our book and eBay stores. The links are below.